Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're talking grey matter. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and new special advisor to Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou MacDonald. Martin, congratulations on the new job. Is it PAYE or one of those bogus self-employment jobs you're always going on about?
Chuck Harlow.
Oh, no. We won't go there. But more importantly, we're delighted to be, and a little bit scared to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by psychologist, award-winning communicator, brain health advocate, Doctor, Professor, all-round guru, Sabina Brennan. Now, I have to read this out because beside my flippant intro, Sabina is a member of the Medical and Scientific Advisory Panel for the Alzheimer Society of Ireland. She serves on the Global Coalition on Ageing Advisory Council. She's a member of the Trinity College Equality Committee, and she's also a member of Trinity Engage Steering Committee, and she has served on the School of Psychology Ethics Committee for several years. I don't know, Martin, what have we done with our lives, mate?
Every time we bring a guest in here, I just say to myself, what have you done with your life?
In fairness, some of those now I'm not on, but there's new ones.
Listen.
It is terribly impressive. I mean, it is terribly impressive. And your career is I've looked online and your videos, everything is just so very impressive and polished and finished and nothing at all amateurish about any of it. And we're like in awe because you're sitting here in the Tortoise Shack.
And you're seeing the end product. God, I could come here more often. The compliments are great.
But you're here to talk to us about the brain and how important the brain is and how we overlook our brains.
Yeah, isn't it kind of funny? We've got one of the most amazing things in the universe inside our head, and we walk around and we don't give it a second thought. I mean, there's something that I do. I give a lot of talks around brain health, and there's something I do at the start of the talks and I ask people to put their hands up if they brushed their teeth this morning. So I'm gonna. There's nods coming here. Yeah, you brushed your teeth this morning, and then your intent being the important word. You intend to brush them again this evening.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's brilliant, right? Because dental health is really important. You need your teeth to eat, to speak, and to smile, but you need your brain for everything. So what did you consciously do for your brain health today?
Slept.
Well, that's good. Yes.
Yeah. No, hang on. No, that's only because I cheated and read that your brain gets rid of toxins while you sleep. Listen. We did a little bit of research.
But the fact of the matter is, usually the third question I say is, now keep your hands up if you did anything consciously for your brain health today. And pretty much most of the hands go down, and you'll have one or two.
Does 2 Nespressos just to give it a little boost? Does that count?
Well, Nespressos is the caffeine.
Yes.
It's not really good for the brain.
Okay.
And it interferes with the sleep. It gives you a temporary boost, but it puts you in a kind of a bit of a...
I thought I was doing that for my brain this morning.
You're smiling a lot, though. So what you can see on this podcast is the most amazing smile coming at me. And smiling is really good for brain health. It's also good for your mental health as well. And your physical health, because it boosts your immune system, lowers your blood pressure. Smiling is an all-round good thing. We don't do enough of it.
What should we be doing for our brain first thing in the morning?
For our brain health, people will often be surprised to learn that one of the things that you can do for brain health that's really good is physical exercise. Your brain you've billions of neurons in your brain. It weighs only about 2% of your body, but it consumes 25% of the energy that you take in. And it needs to be serviced well. So you need to exercise. If you exercise, good aerobic exercise, you're going to be able to give your brain the good supply. And there's also some research that suggests it can capitalize on the extra oxygen and nutrients. And so it can kind of help your function.
So that would be better than, say, doing a Sudoku first thing in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, that's funny too. People think, when they think about brain, they think cerebral and they think, doing, hard stuff, academic stuff, rocket sciencey stuff.
Trying to
get someone hands me a white paper of 128 pages and says, Tony, I need a synopsis of that. That is not good for my brain, but it has to be done,
Well, it's probably not good for your brain because it increases your stress levels. The chronic stress can impair functioning. But it's quite interesting. We tend not to think of our brain as an organ. that needs to be cared for, and really it is, and it needs to be cared for like you need to care for your heart.
Did I see someone, I can't remember, refer to, said, think about it almost as if, we're all into now in the modern days, like, I'll make sure your gut is the fauna are right and the bacteria are right and your gut is healthy, and someone said, and we don't even think about, as you said, all the neurons that are literally in your brain that have to flush themselves with toxins as well, and have to actually be
so you do have loads of neurons in your gut as well, but your stomach gets much more attention, your heart gets much more attention, etc. But actually, to me, do you remember that what was it, Thomas the Tank Engine, and it was the master controller or something like that? But your brain really is the master controller, and nothing works without your brain. It's involved in every aspect of your life. So to me, it makes sense to really prioritize that and keep it in good health, in good shape. In fairness, we're aware of physical health, thankfully more and more aware of mental health. Brain health is a distinct thing. The thing is, they're all inextricably linked and tied together. So if you do things that are good for your brain health, it's going to impact on your physical health, and it's also going to impact on your mental health. Conversely, if you're not looking after your mental health and your physical health, it's going to impact on how your brain functions.
You think we should challenge ourselves quite a lot.
Yes.
And we don't challenge ourselves enough. Now, you don't mean jumping on motorbikes, or do you mean?
No, when I'm talking about challenge, I'm talking about learning, I'm talking about change, I'm talking about having novelty in your life. So the brain, I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So they say, scientists used to think that the brain was fixed and set like concrete, and so basically you were stuck with what you were, well, not quite what you were born with, but once you got to adulthood, that was it. You were kind of stuck with it. And what we've learned really now in recent years is actually the brain is plastic. Now, not like credit card plastic, but more like pliable,
rubbery.
Yeah, it can kind of grow. And the thing is that neuroplasticity happens at 3 stages in our life. It happens when we're born, because if you think of us as creatures, we're born with incomplete brains. You look at giraffes or foals, and within hours of short period of being born, they're able to walk. Now it takes our human offspring 10 months to a year to learn that, and that's because we're born with an incomplete brain. So very early in life there's a lot of development has to happen, and so that's what the plasticity there is. In response to a child being stimulated and learning, their brain gets bigger. Second time it happens, which a lot of people may not know about, is in response to an injury. So if you were in a car crash and you sustained a head injury, plasticity will come into play and try to compensate for the injury or find new ways around damage. But then the third time that it happens is every time something new is learned. So plasticity actually is the capacity of the brain to learn. And the thing is, it offers, what we believe now is, it offers us a buffer and a protection in advance against things like brain injury or disease or aging.
And when we talk about things like we've always said, trust your gut. Quite often I would always think that that's actually a bank of experiences that you've actually built up unconsciously yourself. Your brain has said, I've been here before, I've seen this before, the outcome was likely X. And your gut instinct is actually a mathematical decision that your brain has done unconsciously for you. And sometimes it's actually avoiding, as you say, you could be avoiding trouble or making a decision on something that you just thought it may be a new experience, but it's actually similar to something else where you've got that. Am I?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. So what you're feeling in your stomach is probably the release of hormones. And a lot of people, I said the brain is an organ, but some people describe the brain as just this great big secreting hormone, because most of your hormones arise from there. So there's another way of looking at what you're talking about in terms of, some people say we have 2 systems in our brain. Sort of one of them is like that unconscious system that you're talking about, and then the second is a more conscious system. The unconscious system is related to what we call evolutionary older parts of the brain. So down in your amygdala, which is part of your brain that's really, really deep in old part. It's there longer than our cerebral cortex is what makes us human. That's the crinkly bit at the top. And that developed evolutionarily much later. So the fight or flight response is very classic. You know, something happens that could be dangerous. You need an instinctive, immediate response so that you can fight or flee and deal with what that crisis is. In the fight or flight response, what then will happen a little bit later is your second system, your thinking conscious system, kicks in and makes decisions based on what that gut sort of instinct is saying.
And I'm sorry now, but you know they talk about the limbic loop.
Right.
So we're here, we're talking, and there's transference going on, because I'm looking at Martin now, and I'm looking at you, and we're doing this, and I'm just conscious of the fact that at some level we talk about things like, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy and neuro-linguistic programming and all of these things. That are they the actual things that people should be doing to train their brain to look after themselves?
Exercise.
Yeah, I mean, you know, CBT and those things are great for helping people, you know, deal with certain, you know, issues and challenges they may face. I'm really focused much more on just everyday things that you can do yourself that can boost your brain and build what we call reserves in your brain. And that's, for me, is really, really exciting. Is that it's a relatively recent area of discovery around the brain that came about in 1989, when a researcher called Katzman was trying to understand dementia.
Okay.
And so he was looking at slices of the brain, right? Not very pleasant. Post-mortem, obviously. And he was looking at the brains of people with dementia. And as with any research, as you know, you also need a control group, because you need something to compare it to.
Yeah.
And so it was out of this group of people in a nursing home. So his control group were people who didn't have dementia or didn't have dementia symptoms. And what he found was a number of the people in his control group had the pathology of Alzheimer's disease in their brain, but they had never manifested any symptoms.
Oh.
So, yeah, you go, oh, that's like a big moment in discovery, because you go, what is it about these people that they can have the disease in their brain, but they don't have symptoms? So that whole area of research exploded in what it's like a resilience, right? But in scientific terms, the people who work in that area, we call it cognitive reserve.
Okay.
And what it seems to be is that you can build up a resilience in your brain that allows you to withstand a disease like Alzheimer's disease, but also changes associated with aging, or indeed withstand the impact of a brain injury, or even diseases like multiple sclerosis. That you can hold on to your cognitive functions like memory, or what might ordinarily go in a disease like Alzheimer's. You can hold on to that function for much, much longer. You've some sort of buffer. You've built reserves that help protect. And the thing is, in the longer term, you will ultimately get symptoms. So there's people post-mortem, if they've lived longer, they'll ultimately get symptoms, but they've had a period of time where they can continue functioning for longer. So it's like changing the trajectory of the disease and pushing out the time where there's an onset, so that perhaps, maybe, hopefully, you die of something that's not as awful as dementia.
And I was going to say this, your dementia is a huge thing, and there are so many people going to be affected by dementia, and it's increasing. Am I right on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's currently about 55,000 people living with dementia in Ireland. And that figure is set to triple by 2050, which is one of the main reasons I'm really passionate about brain health, because what a lot of people don't know, we still don't have it's very taboo. There's a lot of stigma associated with dementia. People don't talk about it. When I was a kid, people didn't used to talk about cancer. It was the big C, and it was whispered about. And that same sort of thing still applies to dementia. And unfortunately, and feel very strongly about this, you know, we hide people with dementia away. We don't allow them be a part of our lives or our community. We warehouse them in these nursing homes outside of the city, on the edge of the city. And I call them actually the leper colonies of our time, because it's no different. There's absolutely no medical reason that people with dementia should all be housed in the one place. In fact, it doesn't make sense, because if you're having a problem with language or memory, it doesn't make sense for you to be sat beside someone else who's having those problems. And you're not going to get any stimulation.
Or build those reserves that you talk about.
And you know what? You have every right to continue living in your own home. You just need some support. Sorry, I'm gone off on a rant there, but I do feel really strongly about
it's the
that.
lack of supports that are forcing people into homes.
But it's also a lack of understanding that, actually cognitive errors and stimulating those people, engaging them cognitively, making sure they're socially connected, with exercise, all those sort of things can actually allow those people hold on to their functioning for longer.
And we had a really a few months ago we had Simon McGarry in here, and he spoke about his generation, my generation, being the peak of the baby boom, and how dementia and Alzheimer's were going to become an issue. I don't know if he spoke about it on the pod or did we just speak about it over coffee, but he actually mentioned that the fact that because our parents are going to be of that 55,000 and we are the largest voting bloc, any government that won't deal with this in the next decade or so are going to get a right kicking electorally, because that's what's going to become. Now, at the same time, that doesn't deal with the issue today.
And the problem is there's two things, because I've had one-to-one meeting with government ministers for older people and etc. Really trying to get people to cop on to this. But because it's something that it is in the future, it's not on immediate, but it needs long-term planning. And one of the things that's really important is that there are, what people don't know, they have sort of a view that there's nothing that you can do about dementia, and that's a misconception. Age is the biggest risk factor, but after that, there are 7 modifiable risk factors, things that we can do something about that actually. So there's about 140 million people globally living with dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, and a huge proportion of those cases could be prevented if we addressed the risk factors. And I'm talking about things like smoking increases your risk of developing dementia.
I didn't know that.
Yes, you see? So you should know that. I think as a human being, you should have the right to know. I'm an ex-smoker myself.
I have to put up my hand here. I smoke. Oh
right,
my
well,
God.
do you know what? I used to say try, give up. Now I just say, don't be stupid. Just give up. And I know it's hard. I've done it myself. I started smoking I think I was 12, terrible. But yes, smoking increases your risk, but it also, the toxins, and it deprives your brain of the oxygen it needs. So you're making your brain work very hard. You'll think more clearly in everything without the cigarettes. Type 2 diabetes, midlife obesity, depression, low levels of educational attainment, and mental stimulation. I might talk about that a little earlier. And low levels of physical activity. That's 7 key ones. But
Sabina, that was really interesting what you said about education and the link between education and Alzheimer's. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so low levels of educational attainment are associated with higher incidence of dementia. So you can imagine when that was kind of found, how sort of awfully damning a thing that...
There's a socioeconomic link there.
Yeah, and you see, it all feeds on, because we know that mental stimulation and, stimulating occupations that challenge your brain and stimulate your brain, help to buffer and reduce your risk. And the problem is, you see, if you've low levels of educational attainment, chances are you may go into a manual job, and it kind of builds and builds on it. You're probably less likely to read or play or take part in activities that might be more stimulating, and so you're actually your brain is suffering as a consequence. Education is I obviously see it as the great liberator, but in terms of brain health, it's it's more powerful than any brain game, any technology, any drug that you could take. It is hugely powerful. Now, I don't want to make that negative if there's people listening who had low levels of educational attainment. I should say that I left school at 16 and I didn't go to university until I was in my 40s. So, it's kind of never too late, and I'm passionate about lifelong learning. But I just want to very briefly mention a scientific research study that was done it's called the Bronx Healthy Aging Study, if memory serves me correctly. And what they did was, we know that educational attainment increases risk, but we also know that engaging in stimulating activities offers a protection. So they wanted to look at the interaction between those things. So basically, they followed 468 older adults for a period of time. At the baseline, they took a note of the stimulating activities that they were engaging in. Now, I'm not talking rocket science. I'm not talking, engineering or computer programming. These were things like reading, writing, playing music, discussions, what you'd call hobbies, right?
Yeah.
So they took a note of those at baseline. And what they found was that as the study progressed, 100 of that 468 went on to develop dementia. Now, that was over just a 5-year period. It really kind of puts it in context.
Figure.
Yeah. But what they found was that in those people who went on to develop dementia, when they looked at that group, engaging in, so if you were in a drug trial, there'd be a dose, take this medication one day.
Yeah.
So they did the same with the
Stimulation.
the hobbies, the stimulating activities. So engaging in one activity for 1 day per week was the sort of dose that we're talking about.
It was like taking one med.
Yes. So they said that engaging in one activity 1 day per week pushed out the onset of severe memory loss for 2 months. So essentially, the engaging in the hobby, that's what I was talking about earlier, it allows you push out symptoms. So it can buy you time of holding on to important functions. The really interesting thing in that study was that effect was independent of education level. So it didn't matter whether you'd left school early or not.
Yeah.
These were all older people, over 65 at the start of the study. So that's really positive.
It is.
That's the message I want to get out there, is that, if you left school early, get engaged, get stimulating. It actually doesn't matter what it is that you take on. Once it involves challenge, once it's pushing you beyond your comfort zone, so it could be singing, it could be carpentry, it could be joining a choir, it could be learning how to line dance.
Could it be Twitter?
No.
It could be Twitter when we used to just have 140 characters, because I used to find that was challenging.
Yes, it was.
It's less challenging now, and in fact, in a way, I'm kind of feeling I miss the smaller characters, because it forced me to be really succinct.
You had to self-edit.
Work at it. Yes.
So that would be somewhat challenging. But the point of the matter is that yes, if you do those things, I'm really passionate about that our state needs to invest in supporting lifelong learning. And we have a particular group in Ireland. Women are at greater risk of developing dementia than men. Now, part of that is that women live longer than men, and age is the biggest risk factor, but there's other things at play. That doesn't answer all of the questions. In Ireland particularly, if you think back, women tended to leave school early, went to commercial colleges, or women weren't allowed. The current cohort of older people at risk for dementia, they weren't allowed to work. So
That's right.
after they married,
yes.
there was the marriage bar. And so they were deprived of that opportunity to become stimulated. And in fact, they were probably isolated in their homes as well, rearing kids. We didn't have Twitter, we didn't have social media, you didn't have, phones in the same way to be connected. That's a group of people that I believe are vulnerable, that I believe that with some state investment and support to allow them to go to university, or to support them taking courses, or to provide community activities and community places. I really think we need to get back to community living, and that living to involve all aspects of the human species, with all our, warts and all, because that's what makes life interesting. And if you have communities that are engaging in a central space that has those kind of activities, I'm talking like, whether it's woodwork or a place where you can go for a chat or a sing, that had people with dementia, kids who need to be cared for after school, people with mental health issues, all in the one place, we all learn from each other and we all benefit from each other. We need more of that. We've kind of gone away from
when
that.
we said you were coming on, and there was a great response when we said people are interested in their brains, and there was a good response, but we got some questions, and we can't go through every one, but one overriding question was about social exclusion, and about be it children with a disability, be it elderly people at home. Is social exclusion harmful to your brain? Is it?
So there's two slightly different terms there. There's social exclusion and there's social isolation.
Yes.
So exclusion is where we sort of in society do something that segregates or
Yeah,
separates people.
you covered earlier about how we've taken people with dementia and we've stuck them on the outskirts of the city. You know?
Yes, exactly that. And we do that with people with certain disabilities as well. And so, yes, you are then socially isolating those people, and that is not good for them. Loneliness and social isolation, there's kind of a phrase that's bandied about, but they're as bad for our health as smoking and obesity. Yet we've had no public health campaigns to address social isolation. Again, I've spoken to government ministers and I have said, if you want to make a real difference in life, we need a campaign to address social isolation. Now, a lot of people tend to think when they're talking about social isolation about older people being isolated, but social isolation is not really age dependent. It's more context specific and more maybe around stage of life or circumstances of your life. So you can be socially isolated when you leave school for the first time and go to university and you've left home. Women, first time they have babies and they're at home socially isolated. For me, that's actually one of the times in my life where I felt most lonely. It was pre-social media. And I was isolated in my house all day long with a baby that nobody gave me a manual on how to be a mum. We can exclude people by not allowing them be integrated, as you've just said. And I think when we were chatting earlier, you were talking about people who are living in hotels, a temporary accommodation. What they're missing is a community, and what actually we're all missing is a community. I've said this before. I think our brain has the capacity for us to be really, really smart, right, as a species, as humans. But we've done some really, really stupid things. And one, I think, of the most stupid things that we've done is I believe that somewhere along the line, we took a wrong turn by measuring success in terms of how big a box we can isolate ourselves from our fellow human beings. Now,
I would go with you on that.
I would
definitely go with you.
I like the box that I live in, and I like having my own territory. But in terms of our mental health and our brain health and our overall general emotional well-being and our happiness, we really need to have communities. We need to go back to that
People need
around
people.
the campfire thing. And if you think about it, I don't want us going around the campfire, but that's metaphorically speaking. And I do think there's benefit. I mean, as you've probably guessed, I like to talk a lot and I like people and I like chatting, but I also need my time alone. Do you know what I mean? I can't be on all the time. I get tired. So we do need those two kinds of spaces, but I think we need more of that community living where we go back and it would solve so many problems, because parents who want to work, their kids, if they're in the same place where people are living with dementia, if you've ever seen anybody, my mum had dementia, and we used to borrow somebody's niece because she just loved children and babies.
My gran used to light
up. And kids don't have any fear. No. We create a fear by hiding people away, and the same applies with people with,
we create the anxiety.
Intellectual disabilities.
Yes.
People are fearful of them because they've never had an opportunity to interact with them. And what we do is we other people. And I said people with dementia are just you and me with a brain disease, and we just need to interact more.
I often think of the opening of Wuthering Heights when he opens and says, "I'm a perfect misanthropist," and he's living in the middle of nowhere, and he sets off to meet see the first farmhouse he can to go meet someone. I want to be in the middle, because that always strikes me as this awful moment of going, No, you can't be. You need people. Need people.
People need people. You're probably too young to remember that used to be a song. People who need people are the luckiest people in the world. It used to be Frankie Byrne.
I remember my mother singing it at some stage. I don't remember it.
Well, after school, it used to be on the radio in the afternoon, and it was Dear Frankie, and it was an agony. She was like an agony aunt or something, and that was the song they played. But you're so right. The thing is, when we become excluded, as you've just said, for whatever reason, you're pushed outside of the main social group. So we need people. we're bipeds. We're not very good at surviving on our own. We need groups of people from an evolutionary perspective. So when you're isolated and you become aware that you're isolated, your brain is very smart. It needs to protect you. You've got nobody protecting you. So what happens is your sleep becomes impaired because you don't go into a deep sleep. You come into this life because you need to be on alert. There's nobody. You can't go into that deep sleep because there's nobody there protecting you. And lack of sleep is really, really bad for your brain because your brain has a job of work to do at night when you sleep. So number one reason when you're isolated. Number two, what happens is your brain puts you on high alert. And you become mistrustful of people. So essentially what happens is your empathy goes down and your fear levels go up. And often people say, oh, well, there's no wonder they're on their own. Sure, they're an oddball. And we make that fallacious connection that they're on their own because they're an oddball socially.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the reverse.
And we reinforce it.
There's nothing odd about people who become social isolated to begin with. It's usually context. Something in life has happened.
Yeah.
Could be a bereavement or, a divorce or all sorts of things. But then their social skills change because from an evolutionary perspective, you have to be on high alert.
Yeah.
And so there's two things. If we want to tackle our big epidemic of social isolation in the world, we have to do it at two levels. We have to prevent it happening. We have to put things in place that prevent it happening. And that involves a big societal change in terms of how we live, having more spaces for communal connection. But then when it's already happened to someone, you can't just fix it by inviting them back in because they've become so scared. They mistrust you. So there's work needs to be done to understand how we can re-embrace.
Yeah, But I'd imagine, like, because I know we had Tracy McGuinness asked the question, and she's a carer of a child who's palliative, and she can feel socially isolated.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, when we went up, we did a podcast from her house because we had to go to her house, and we were glad to do it. But when we had to do that as our undertaking, you knew, okay, this is really something that, I couldn't walk a mile in her shoes when I think of things like that. So, you understand that, yes, the community, she talks about respite care, and that's not at all a holistic view of how we should be including people within a community. It goes to it just reinforces what you're telling me. It reinforces my experience of what I saw that day, of how we need to be more inclusive.
I think we also need to, when with community, it can't just be a community that confirms all your biases. It has to be a community that challenges you.
So that's the one problem with Twitter and social media is the echo chamber of, the confirmation bias where you just get fed people with the same. I was actually on News Talk the other day, and we were on a panel discussion, and we were talking about etiquette, in dinner parties. Now, it's far from dinner parties I was raised, but, one of the suggestions was you make sure that people, at the dinner party have similar views, so this not unpleasant. I'm sorry, if you were having a dinner party in my house or any sort of thing, I want people with disparate views, because diversity of views makes me challenge my own views to ensure whether they I'm probably the same, because I'm not afraid to say. And I think that's where we go wrong sometimes. We have this, opposite ends, and they shall never meet.
Yeah,
and through discussion
we talk about it all the time that there's quite the Venn diagram overlap is usually less than and when you have that, it's not healthy.
So there's people who've done far cleverer than me, who've done analysis of conversations and how they work in terms of politicians. And actually, Trump is a really good example, and it also happened after the towers in 9/11. You see an us and them. It's you're either with us or you're against us, and there's a bifurcation of complex problems, and it's black and white, and that's not the truth. And we're seeing it again with Trump in a way. Now, there's people who've analysed political dialogue before things like wars and before things like, for example, when the Berlin Wall fell down. And what you see is before wars, you have this black-white opposing views. Before progress in peace talks or things like the Berlin Wall coming down, you see rich nuance of language that talks about the compromises, talks about the complexity of situations, and it's only from that and from understanding how other people think that you can start to realize, well, there's other perspectives, and so here's little steps that we can take to help us out this.
We actually call that joining the dots, and it's something we're kind of big on here, is that we join the dots between different things. So language is one, and how language is used, it's a big thing with us. But I need to come back to something else. You left school at 16?
Yeah, but I did my leaving, so that kind of was a bit of a misconception. I was doing my leaving at 16, and then I just turned 17. Sorry, I just hit my mic. I did, yeah, and I went into a lovely boring job. Sorry, Irish Life.
Oh, you were in Irish Life?
Irish Life Assurance Company. I did it. I was the youngest of 5, and I kind of did it to please my dad. He worked there, and his big ambition was that I,
follow.
Yeah.
And it was that desk job, that office space, water cooler.
Yes. Pensions administration.
Oh, that sounds so exciting, and I'm sure you
mentally stimulating.
You come across as a person that just needs more than actuary stuff. You just do.
It was. I tell you what. Irish Life at that time exploded in terms of its staff. It's a bit like what's happening with a lot of the IT companies now. So they were a small company, and then suddenly they kind of got big. So there was probably, I worked in Abbey Street, in that big building on Abbey Street, where the fountain is.
Well, they still own nearly most of that road now at this stage.
So when I started...
What is the Canadian company that owned them now?
I don't know.
You heard recently that I think we paid 1.2 billion for them.
Yes.
And they've been making over 400 million a year in profit from them. So anyway, that's just my economist head coming on.
Yeah. I don't have an economist head. I'm really, that's one thing that really I struggle to get my head around. But so at that time, I think there was 1,200 staff, and I'd say 1,000 of us were probably under 23.
Right.
So there was a lot of kind of working to fuel the social life.
Yeah. And how long did you stay doing that?
15 years of my life that I will never get back. Having said that, though, I did get a mortgage, and I had my 2 kids. And
but then one morning you just woke up and said, I'm going to do something.
Well, actually, it was about my 2 kids, to be honest. Becoming a parent, as you know, just changes your whole view of the world. And I was young. I had my kids young, relatively speaking. And I just said, right, okay, when it comes to parenting, I don't want my kids coming into a job that they don't like. You spend too much of your life in it. So I want to bring them up to find something that they love, and find a way to get someone to pay them to do that. And I said, well, hold on, kids learn by example, and I'm in a job that I don't love. What do I love? What would I love to do? And from the age of 8, I'd been an actor. I loved drama. It was called speech and drama then.
Speech and drama, yeah.
And I did my speech and drama exams, and I used to be in all the fashion, and I'd win prizes, and I loved it. But my father was actually rather old when I was born, relatively speaking. He was in his 40s, and people didn't become actresses. And actually, an actress was pretty close to what they refer to as well, in his mind, the oldest profession in the world. No, but
there was the connotation.
It was kind of a connotation that you would be a loose woman, or
wanton.
Yes. So it was just not on the radar. So I actually said, you know what, that's what I want to do. So 2 kids in tow. I got while I was still working in Irish Life, I got my speech and drama teacher's diploma with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London. And I did a bit of drama teaching, and I tried to find work as an actor. And I did. And I worked, I loved film. I like the immediacy of it. It's not the applause of theatre that gets me. I loved the challenge, actually, when I think about it, of figuring out the character and how to play the words. So I worked in Fair City for a number of
I did notice that one.
Yeah, 168 episodes as Tess Halpin. Yeah, it's nice. I loved it. And to be honest, if my part hadn't ended, I'd probably still be an actor.
So you go from Fair City. You've talked about. Then you go. You talk downstairs about your TV sons. I don't know offense to your actual sons, but then how do you become so interested in brain health? Like, I mean, like, it's such a huge leap for me.
So it's, yeah, in a sense, it's not a huge leap. So what happened was my part finished in Fair City, and it's funny, in Ireland you kind of become unemployable. I had really a high profile role at the time. There was a lot of I played a battered wife, so I don't know if that's politically correct to say it that way anymore. A woman who was subject to domestic abuse. At the time, that's actually the way it was described back then. And so there was news stories and stuff about it. So it was kind of hard for me to kind of get work after. So I thought I might do a night course in psychology. And I accidentally, when I rang about a night course, they said, "Oh, we're accepting mature students up till 5 o'clock today." Now this was 4:30. I put my application in. So suddenly I found myself doing a full-time degree in psychology. Now, you said, a lot of people said the jump from acting to psychology, but the buzz for me from acting was about understanding human behaviour. It was understanding my character and how I could bring that to life, and what did that really mean? What was the inside story? What was going on in their head? You know,
so it was
aside from the words. So actually, and as a kid, my dad used to have books at home that were about, you know, human evolution and stuff. So that interest in human beings just it just manifested in different ways as an actor and then as a psychologist.
No, just yesterday was the anniversary of Darwin's the origin of the species. So, so don't mind me, I get a bit nerdy. Sorry.
Gosh, you have all those. My head doesn't hold all those.
I couldn't tell you that I struggle with my kids' birthdays. So there you go. I'll admit that.
Well, you see, that's it. The thing is, and this is a tip if people are kind of concerned about memory. We've loads of technology. Let the technology do the job, and you know, of remembering things like birthdays. You know, just put them all in, get your reminder, and then free your brain up for.
And my dad used to do this as well, and I find myself doing. I cycle through the names until I hit the right one.
Right. Yeah.
So I have 2 daughters, but I could call them by my sister's names or call one by the other's name until I hit the right.
I used to be
Joseph.
Syllable polyphil Sabina. Just
Child.
The 5th. Yeah, it was child. You, the smallest one.
Can I ask a question? And if this is to have a kick at the old patriarchy. The male brain doesn't mature as quickly as the female brain.
Yeah. About 25 before so from an evolutionary perspective, the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, it's the most complex part of our brain, and it, you know, does all those really hard stuff like decision making and figuring out complex things. And that's was the latest to develop in humans as a species. It's also the latest to develop in individuals as we grow up. And in males specifically, it's not fully developed till about the age of 25, and that can impact very directly on engaging in risky behaviours and risk assessment.
But it does develop.
Oh yes, it does.
Yeah,
it does.
We don't stay.
Obviously, with anything.
I'm looking at you.
See, with anything to do with the human condition, you'll always have, and this is hard because we're on a podcast. I'm making shapes with my hand like a hill. But you'll always have the bell curve.
Yeah.
So 66% of the population on any trait, including height, all sorts of things, will fall within that middle. But you'll always have people in the tails. And so that will apply in terms of, development.
So it could be 28 before you reach full development. I can't wait to reach 28.
I know professionally they do the psychometric testing, would you believe? And when you do, everybody gets the assessment. They get the bell curve for your natural style, your how you react under pressure, these type of things, and you get the bell curve. And I remember once filling out one of these huge questionnaires, and when they plotted the answers, it literally went like an arrow into the ground. And he said, "Now you'll see your bell curve." And I went, "I don't have a bell curve." And I said, "Why don't I have a bell curve?" And the answer was, "Well, you think you're right even when you're wrong." And so that was the actual.
I have to work with them.
What I think is really funny is that everybody wants to be normal, but nobody wants to be average. And they're the same thing.
Yes, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
So everybody wants to be normal, but if you take a trait like soccer skill, You don't want to be average. You either want to be
you're
the
super
best,
special.
or actually, you know, there's some value in being, oh no, I'm crap at that.
Yeah.
You know, so you fall in the tails. But yeah, I just think it's a really funny phenomenon with other traits. Oh no, I want to be normal, you know. But it applies to everything to do with mental health. You know, we're all, and it's not just in a one thing. We tend to talk about things like depression as if it's a thing rather than it being a process.
Yes.
And a thing, I'm saying it myself, but it's something that is context dependent.
Individual.
And it's not always pathological, you know. I mean, it makes sense to be depressed after someone in your family dies, do you know, and you need to go through a grieving process, or if you lose a job, or you know.
Completely agree with you. There are times in your life when you're meant to be depressed.
Yeah. We've done, I think media has a lot to answer for that, in that it portrays people who are always, you know, in good form. That's not part of the normal condition. And those things like, you know, anger and depression that some people refer to as like negative emotions, they've survived because they serve a purpose.
I find depression extremely creative.
Right.
Extremely creative. When I feel down, that's when I'm at my most creative. When I feel great, couldn't be bothered.
Right, okay. I mean, you know, everybody's different, and we're not talking about clinical depression, you know, where someone has.
We're just talking about.
And I do understand that from a very real, serious perspective. It's not taking away from that, and you know, when it goes to that extreme, you know, you need help. But the key again, as always, is prevention, trying to get in there before things become.
That's actually, there's two things I want to touch on. Tracy asked a question, so
yes,
I wanted
we
to
didn't
touch
really
on
answer that.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that first, and then I want to get some really good tips for moving forward. Great.
So first of all, Tracy, really sorry to hear about your son. That's a tough and challenging thing to deal with anyway. I mean, I think there's analogies with, you know, because of the area I work in providing care for people living with dementia. Those carers become very socially isolated as well because they can't leave the house. They can't leave without the partner. And also then what happens, and I don't know whether, Tracy, you've experienced this, there comes a point when people stop visiting because the thing that you're dealing with is so challenging that they don't know what to do or what to say.
That is so true.
And what I say about carers is, it's to look after yourself as a carer is not selfish, it's sensible. If you're on an aircraft, you get told that when those oxygen masks drop, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you put it on your children, because you have to be in a good shape to look after those kids. And the same applies to if you're caring for somebody. And, you know, Tracy's situation is very challenging, but she has to look after herself and prioritize herself so that she can provide the best care for her child. And that involves allowing time for social connection and engagement and being with other people. I do think as a society, we need to acknowledge that and recognise that sending people into homes, it happens a lot with older people and people with dementia, to do task-based care, you know, in the morning to help you get out of bed, bit of breakfast, in the evening to put you in your PJs to lift you in and out of bed. To be honest, you know, the state and people, carers and the patient would benefit far more from someone coming in and sitting and chatting, having a cup of tea, with the carer or with the other individual and letting them out, letting them go to the hairdressers, letting them have a cup of tea, much, much more beneficial to everybody involved. So I would say that if you know someone who's caring for someone who may be isolated, you know what? Take some time out to go and visit with the carer. Have a cup of tea with them, a chat. Ask them how they are, because sometimes you can become invisible. Everybody focuses on the ill person.
Yes.
Never asks you how you are.
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to ask, and this is for all of us here, and particularly Tony at his age, he has to take care of himself going forward.
I get like this. I'm like Dorian Gray. I look about 12. But
God, I wish.
Oh my God.
Me? Oh
my
yeah,
God.
no, I'm terrible. There's vanity.
We're not having that. We're not having that.
We've had some women on before, and Hazel Catherine Larkin had beautiful purple shoes, and then we saw Sinead Mercier, and she had these lovely red boots. And today I've noticed that you're right on trend with your boots.
Am I?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely on
I know. This goes over my head anyway, so don't worry.
But anyway,
Martin's doing a culture corner.
Yeah, I will do a culture
Yeah.
corner. Just let him off do the running up the mountains and we'll do a culture corner. We need some tips. How do we keep Tony's brain in good shape for the next 20 years?
So the thing is, everybody with a brain needs to consider brain health. You know, a lot of older people are actually ahead of the game here because they've, you know, either had parents with dementia or they're worried about it themselves. But everybody with the brain needs, and that includes kids. So top tips, I said at the start of the program, get physically active. Get your exercise, at least a minimum of your 30 minutes, 5 days a week. But it's not just about getting physical exercise. You also have to sit less, right? Sit less, stand more. Sitting for prolonged periods is not good for you either. Stay socially engaged, socially connected. You know, if you've been bereaved, if there's nobody in your life, get out there, look at a local community, see if there's something going on where you can just go and connect with people.
Men's sheds,
Men's sheds are brilliant, and I believe if there's any doctors listening there, you know, prescribe men. I gave a talk in Scotland about social isolation. They're doing great stuff over there. And the doctors are doing that. It's social prescribing. So prescribing, giving people information about the local men's shed or community group. Third one is challenge your brain, right? So that's where you come in with more of those things, learning something new, taking up new hobbies, doing it right across your lifespan, lifelong learning, and encourage it in your kids going forward. Attitude is really important. I mentioned when you were talking earlier, smiling. Benefits of smiling are hugely important. Stress is a big factor. We actually didn't talk about stress, but stress, because chronic, poorly managed stress can impact negatively on a part of your brain called the hippocampus that's involved in learning and memory, and it impairs that. Now, stress in itself is not bad, and if you want to live a life that's challenging yourself and full of change, you need that's kind of stress level.
Yeah.
You need a level,
that.
yeah.
So you need a level. You need to find your own sweet spot. Too much stress is bad for you, but too little stress is also bad for you. And you don't hear that very often because it leads to boredom and depression. So there's some of the things. A positive attitude to aging. People with a positive attitude to aging live 7.5 years longer than people with a negative attitude to aging.
That's
so that
you,
really
Tony.
matters.
That's you,
that's
Tony. Trying to fight that aging thing, man. Just embrace it and love it.
Well, it's just the negative attitude. So if you remind people before they take a memory test, if you remind them that poor memory is associated with aging, they'll perform more poorly on the memory test. So it really influences on how you perform. And then the final ones are around lifestyle, and they're more related to the risk factors of dementia. So quit smoking. What's good for your heart is good for your brain. So we know an awful lot about heart health, but your heart really is just a pump that services your brain.
Yeah.
So you know all those things. So eating a balanced diet, you know, managing your weight. It's a healthy weight. Being overweight's not good, but in later life being underweight is not good either. So it's really about a healthy weight. Blood pressure. Look, if there's anyone from the government listening, if you could invest a few bob in a campaign that said to people, go get your blood pressure tested.
Yeah.
If people want to check out my YouTube, I have a little small video on it actually about is high blood pressure bad for my brain, and it explains why. Now there's an awful lot of people walking around, particularly men, who have high blood pressure and they don't know that they've high blood pressure. If they got their blood pressure tested, and you can get it done free in loads of pharmacies, and even the next time you go and visit your GP, once that blood pressure is managed by, you know, either following behavioural advice from your GP or through medication, you're minimising that risk. It's a very kind of simple solution.
Fix.
Fix. And you have to quit smoking.
Yeah, I do.
You do.
I do.
That's all in the brain.
I did quit it. And then
No, you probably gave it up, and then your brain's wondering when you're going to go back on it.
I gave it up and I was on those
Oh yeah,
This
I'm not so sure they're good for you either.
very good for a transition. I'll just say it, really good. Got me off cigarettes.
Yeah, but you're
Really?
back on them.
Yeah, that was Christmas.
Yeah.
Blame Christmas.
So it only take about 3 weeks. All you have to do is not talk about it, not talk about being off the cigarettes, and only say and think negative things about cigarettes. and
I'm
your brain.
generally okay at willpower, but I mean, everything else, no problem. Food, booze, everything else, no problem. But cigarettes are just that.
Yeah, the only thing I miss about cigarettes is the kind of boldness factor.
I can't. I have to hold up my hand here and say that's why I started smoking.
Yeah, but
And that's why the lick over here has never smoked in his life.
I just wanted to say, you have tons and tons of information videos.
Yes.
Of places that people can go and learn about their brain health on YouTube, and
we'll put the links out on the Twitter feed.
Yeah. I actually even have special resources for people who are carers. Actually, I've just remembered that now that we're talking.
Me and Tony have been going through them, or Tony and I have been going through them all week, so we quite like them. I mean, I have learned so much from those videos in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And I just recommend that everybody.
And they're fun. So my aim was just so people, because sometimes people, when it comes to things like dementia, etc., they don't want to be depressed. And that's actually why I started making them. I went with this madcap idea and said, can I have some money to make fun films about dementia and brain health? So people, you can laugh at some of them.
Yeah.
They're only 2 minutes long. And they've travelled the world with no promotion.
I mean, I'm looking at the hit rate and I'm thinking, oh God, we're very jealous.
It's everything boils down to the numbers for Martin now. That's it.
But it is, you epitomise, when we said we were going to have people that are just much more knowledgeable, much cleverer than we are on the show.
I'm not more clever.
You epitomise that for us, and it's great for us to see that people can take a career path, then change, and do that whole constant learning.
Lifelong learning.
I highly recommend going to college. I used to say going back to college, and my husband used to say, when do we go back to college? You never went to college in the first place. But I do, I recommend it.
You happy enough for you?
Happy enough. I think we've covered nearly everything we can.
I think that our limited brains can take in.
Our growing brains, we're not quite there yet.
Right, lads. All I want to say is thanks so much for listening. Thanks for all the support. We know we threw up a couple of links yesterday, and a few people have chipped in. Sabina kindly brought her own microphone today, so we're absolutely
actually dying to hear what this sounds like. Like this is an expensive mic, really expensive.
We're thrilled how things are going, and really flattered that people are supporting us. So thanks for your support, and we will talk to you all soon. Thank you. Bye bye.